This one says, how close are we to fully understanding the evolutionary process that produced morality? I guess I'll rephrase it by saying, is there in fact an evolutionary process that produces morality? And if so, how close are we to achieving that? And I guess Massimo would probably be good to start.
So if the question is how close are we to fully understand the evolution of morality, not at all. We're not close to understanding a lot of things in science. If the question is, on the other hand, do we have reasonable evidence, again, talking about evidence and reason, that the foundational blocks of morality evolved over a period of time, yes. I think that's, at this point, that's become pretty much close to incontrovertible. We have enough evidence from comparative studies of closely related species and, as I said, of social primates, that the fundamental blocks of morality, and those fundamental blocks include certain kinds of behaviors, including punishment, behavior that are costly to the individual, because if you go and punish somebody for an immoral act, you're actually expending energy, okay? You're in fact posing yourself to risk, as anybody would know if that person is a policeman, for instance. There is a risk in the punishment activity, right? So you don't do it unless there is, all of a sudden we have an echo here. You don't do it just because it gives you an advantage in terms of reproduction and survival, okay? It is a social activity. Now, so punishment of unjust acts, the recognition that certain acts are not just within the group, but also, to go back to an earlier discussion, the presence of the ability to empathize with your kins, with animals that are like you, the ability to, the evolution, for instance, of so-called mirror neurons, which are these special kinds of neurons that allow us to essentially project our own feelings and thoughts into other people's minds, and vice versa. Right? It allows us essentially to recognize that other people may be thinking or feeling what we are thinking or feeling under similar circumstances. Those all appeared before human beings. And in that sense, they constitute a very strong case taken together for the fact that a basic sense of morality evolved. However, one needs to be very careful because, as I said earlier at the beginning of this evening, that doesn't even begin to exhaust the richness of human moral thinking. Okay, that is just the very basic. That simply explains why most of us, except for very exceptional individuals, have a sense of empathy, have a sense of right and wrong, have a sense of justice. But how do we actually apply this, and what specific issues come about in complex societies such as modern societies, that's a whole different matter, and that is a matter that largely lies, in my opinion, outside of biology, and it deals with cultural evolution and with philosophy, and of course, to some extent, to my way of thinking, unfortunately, deals with religion. But if we did not have that biological basis, we wouldn't even talk about morality. Okay? If there were not that biological instinct, you wouldn't even talk about morality. David Hume famously said, and he was a philosopher, David Hume famously said that reason is and ought to be the slave of passions. And what he meant by that is that unless you actually have an emotional basis, something that makes you care for certain things, you really wouldn't have no motivation whatsoever to engage in any more complex, more sophisticated thought about that even. You have to care. And caring comes from instinctual basis, from biological basis.
I think that there's a basis, I don't know, there's a basis in our development as human beings. At a certain point in our evolution, we made a leap and we have the basis for a high level of abstraction in our thinking and in our emotion. And there's obviously people here who have studied this element of it much more than myself. But this is shaped most fundamentally by the societies in which we live. We are high degree of plasticity and elasticity. And you can see this by different moralities are different in different eras. And even I have a difference on this idea that we all have an impulse towards freedom or justice. These are things too, as much as they're thrown around, that are conditioned by different class outlooks and different class viewpoints. There are, to the slave owner, he was free to invest and purchase more slaves. If you curtailed that, you were curtailing his concept of freedom. To the slave, he obviously had a different concept of freedom. And this is why I brought up the example of the right to eat versus the right to exploit. If the exploiters are free to exploit, which is a common understanding of freedom, I have the right to pay somebody to work for me. I have the right to be paid for working. You know, these are concepts that's just in the way this society is organized. That's historically conditioned.
I'm going to have to...
I'm going to but the idea of the right to be free from that exploitation, that's a different vision of freedom. I just think that all of these things, I'm adding another level of complexity, because none of these things can you flatten down and say, oh, there's a gene for this, or here's where you are hardwired for this. We have enormous plasticity, and then there's many things on the level of the individual, on the level of society, and on the level of the struggle of individuals in society, to, you know, and many different natural phenomena, too.